Greetings to my dear guests on this video. I wish you a pleasant viewing and look forward to your feedback in the comments. 15 years. That's how long I'd been walking into this office building. Same revolving doors, same worn-out receptionist who never quite remembered my name, and the same sharp click of my heels echoing down the marble hallway. I knew the coffee machine's quirks better than most of my coworkers. I knew how to fix the printer when it jammed. I even knew when the HVAC system would start acting up before anyone else noticed. But what I didn't know, not then anyway, was that the ground beneath me was starting to shift. And the first crack came wrapped in a glossy folder labeled Project Obsidian. Helix Core Technologies was supposed to be our crown jewel this quarter. They were conservative, yes, but they trusted us because I'd spent years building that relationship, patiently, strategically, phone call by phone call. This project was their biggest yet, a digital infrastructure overhaul that would span 3 continents and 12 internal departments. I personally reviewed every detail, triple-checked the roadmap. My team had put in weekends, canceled vacations, skipped birthdays. Then Alan, my boss, our VP of Strategic Growth, decided to make a few improvements. He didn't tell me, not even a heads up. Just sent the revised proposal straight to Helix Core's executive team. And it was a disaster. It wasn't just that he overpromised. It was the tone, flippant, hollow, filled with marketing fluff and no actual deliverables. He changed the timeline from 6 months to 4, added new performance guarantees we'd never discussed, and most bafflingly, removed the compliance review entirely. I found out the next morning when Helix Core's project manager called me in a cold fury. "Mia, did you approve this?" I blinked at my screen. "What do you mean?" "The proposal, the one Alan Brewster sent yesterday, it's not the plan we agreed on, not even close." I opened the document. My stomach dropped. "No," I said, my voice steady even as my pulse raced. "I did not." By then, it was too late. The client felt blindsided. "If you can't keep your internal house in order," their VP said in a final call, "then we can't trust you with ours." They pulled the plug within 24 hours. I tried to talk to Alan. I wasn't angry, yet. I just wanted to understand. "I made some executive decisions," he said with a shrug, leaning back in his leather chair like he hadn't just killed a multi-million-dollar contract. Thought it needed a little more pizzazz. "Pizzazz?" I repeated, trying not to grit my teeth. "It's not the end of the world. We'll pivot." We didn't pivot. We spiraled. News of the Helix Core fallout spooked 2 more clients. Vontalux Retail put their expansion plans on indefinite hold, and Skyfleet Logistics ghosted us completely after Alan mistakenly CC'd their CEO on an internal post-mortem email titled Obsidian Flop, Lessons Learned. Yes, that was the actual subject line. Each loss hit like a stone to the chest. My team, my brilliant, overworked team, looked at me like I had answers. I had none. All I had was a gut-deep sense of dread. Alan didn't seem fazed. He blamed market shifts. He called the Vontalux pullout an overreaction. He joked in a meeting that we should rename the Skyfleet account Skedaddle. And then, of course, he started whispering about accountability, not to my face, not yet. But I saw the side glances, heard the not-so-subtle digs in leadership sinks. "Maybe we've leaned too hard on one approach," he said once, eyes sweeping the room but landing briefly, intentionally, on me. That's when I knew. He was going to pin this on me. So I did what I always do when the walls start to close in. I built. Not with bricks, but with data. I dusted off an old project, a quiet little tool I'd been developing on the side for years. It mapped real-time contributions across departments, tracked deliverables by user, and highlighted whose work actually drove results. I'd kept it tucked away, never deployed it outside my team. But now it was going to be my shield, my record, my proof. Because if Alan was planning a quiet betrayal, he had no idea what kind of storm was waiting on the other side. And I had just started setting the clouds. I've always believed in the power of showing up. I showed up when our lead developer quit 2 days before a product launch. I showed up when our head of marketing had her second baby, and we had to rewrite the entire brand strategy overnight. I showed up when everyone else ducked, when no one wanted to take the client call, when there were 20 fires burning and no fire marshal in sight. I was there, and people noticed. The interns came to me when they were overwhelmed. Managers leaned on me during board presentations. Even the cleaning staff knew my name and saved me the last blueberry muffin on Fridays because they saw how often I stayed late. But Alan? Alan didn't notice that. Or maybe he did. And that's exactly why he turned on me. The change wasn't sudden. It never is. It started with his tone. Subtle shifts, a raised eyebrow during meetings, a comment here, a dismissal there. At first, I chalked it up to pressure. We'd just lost 3 major clients after all. Of course he was stressed. Of course he was defensive. I told myself he'd calm down, see reason, realize where the real breakdown had occurred. But then came the first public jab. We were in a cross-department meeting, reviewing the quarterly pipeline. Alan was leading, pacing like he was auditioning for a TED Talk, when the conversation shifted to client retention. He paused, glanced at me, then said, "We wouldn't be in this position if we'd managed expectations better from the start. Some departments promised outcomes they couldn't deliver." He didn't say my name. He didn't have to. My stomach clenched. The room went quiet. Everyone knew who he meant. I waited until the meeting ended, then followed him to his office. "Alan," I said, closing the door behind me, "if you have concerns about my department, I'd appreciate it if we discussed them privately." He looked up from his laptop, smiled thinly. "I'm just speaking to trends, Mia. Nothing personal. 3 of our biggest clients left because of unauthorized changes you made," I said quietly. "You sent proposals that weren't approved, removed legal safeguards, and bypassed our compliance team." He tilted his head, like I was a child missing the point. "You were supposed to manage those relationships," he said. "If they fell apart, that's on you." I blinked. "I tried to fix the fallout. You never gave me the chance to prevent it." "Mia, leadership is about results, not rescue missions." That was the first time I felt the full weight of what was happening. He wasn't just shifting blame. He was rewriting history. And it got worse. He started pulling me from client calls, removing me from CC lists, delegating my responsibilities to junior staffers without explanation. The silence around me grew louder with each passing day. And when I asked him directly what was going on, his answer was simple. "I need people who can evolve. You're too entrenched." Too entrenched. As if 15 years of experience was a liability. As if being the backbone of the company somehow made me obsolete. I tried to document everything. I forwarded emails to my personal account, saved meeting notes. I even started recording my one-on-ones, but it felt like I was bailing water out of a sinking ship with a teacup. At the next leadership review, Alan laid it all out, blunt and brutal. "Mia's department failed to retain key accounts," he said, without flinching. "We need fresh energy, new eyes." I opened my mouth to respond, but he cut me off. I don't want excuses." "I'm not making excuses," I said, heat rising in my voice. "I'm giving context. That's not the same thing." But he'd already moved on, turned his attention to the bright-eyed analyst beside me. Someone who hadn't even been with the company long enough to earn their first vacation. I sat there, stone still, while the room nodded along. No one challenged him. No one defended me. Because no one wanted to be next. Back at my desk, I stared out at the skyline and realized something terrifying. It didn't matter how hard I worked. It didn't matter how many weekends I gave up or how many fires I put out. In Alan's version of this story, I was the villain. And villains don't get redemption arcs. They get written out. So I did what I had to do. I took a deep breath. I opened my laptop, and I started preparing for the ending he didn't see coming. By the time the calendar flipped to May, the office buzzed with one word: negotiations. 3 new high-stakes contracts were on the table. Big ones. Potentially transformational, the kind of clients we used to dream about 5 years ago. Now they were in our pipeline, scheduling meetings, asking for deliverables, requesting tours of our flagship departments. It should have felt like a triumph. Instead, it felt like a funeral waiting to happen. Because I knew what was coming. I wasn't stupid. These negotiations were going to be the line in the sand. If they succeeded, Alan would take the credit. If they failed, well, I'd already seen how that story ended. He'd need someone to fall on the sword, and he was already holding the hilt, and I was already bleeding. Still, I kept my head down, kept working, kept building. But not just for the clients anymore. This time, I was building for me. Every day, I arrived 15 minutes early. Every night, I stayed until the halls were dark and the janitor's radio was the only sound. And between the endless status meetings and strategy alignment sessions that Alan led with the finesse of a wrecking ball, I compiled evidence. I opened a hidden folder on my laptop, password protected, cloud synced, scrubbed clean of metadata. I called it Athena. Inside, timelines, email threads, original pitch decks, proposal revisions, client feedback, everything that told the real story. My story. The one Alan kept trying to overwrite with buzzwords and blame. I tracked the exact moment he inserted false metrics into the Helix Core proposal. I documented the CC error that sent confidential post-mortem notes to Vantalux's CEO. I even included a screenshot of the Slack message he sent me at 1:14 a.m., directing me to handle the Skyfleet fallout, days after he had sent a non-compliant draft directly to their legal counsel. But I didn't stop there. I added voice memos from hallway conversations, meeting notes, performance reports. I pulled up our internal dashboard and highlighted every campaign my team had led in the past 2 quarters, 7 of which directly contributed to pipeline growth, 4 of which exceeded projected ROI by 30%. I knew what he was going to say when the contracts were signed, or if they weren't. Either way, the ending was already written in his mind. I'd be called a distraction, no longer aligned with the company's new direction, a misfit for the culture of innovation. He was going to fire me. I felt it in the way he avoided eye contact during our last sync, in how he sent my weekly report back, with more aggressive phrasing highlighted, in the fact that he'd quietly moved my desk out of sightline of the glass conference room. Still, I smiled when I passed him in the hallway, still said good morning, still pretended not to hear when he laughed with the junior execs about legacy leadership issues. Because I wasn't planning to stop him, I was planning to expose him. And when the moment came, when he stood in front of the board, or HR, or whatever sanitized firing committee he'd arranged, I wasn't going to defend myself with words. I was going to show them the truth. But first, the negotiations had to play out. That was the stage. And I had no doubt Alan was already rehearsing his final act. He just didn't know I was writing a sequel. The negotiation prep meetings started on a Monday, which somehow felt fitting, like the universe knew we were about to walk into a week that would change everything. The new clients, VerityLink, Solentra, and Kyber Data, were all circling at once, the kind of synchronized opportunity that only happens once every few years, if you're lucky. Each wanted exclusivity, each wanted custom solutions, and each was already being courted by at least 2 of our competitors. This was it. Make or break. I'd worked the entire weekend, building pitch decks, customizing strategy matrices, rewriting delivery timelines based on their industry needs. My team was exhausted but energized. We were ready. We had substance, value, proof. Then Alan called me into his office that morning. I walked in with my notepad in hand, expecting to run through the presentation flow, or maybe even get a last-minute curveball to handle. Instead, he didn't look up, just kept scrolling on his phone, then finally set it down with a dramatic sigh. "Mia," he said, leaning back in his chair like he was trying to casually toss a grenade. "Before we step into these negotiations, we need to be honest about where we stand." I waited. "You've been here a long time," he said, "and I respect that. But your judgment, Lately, it's been costly. I frowned. Costly how? His eyes met mine then, flat, deliberate. Because of you, we lost 3 of our biggest clients. I blinked. I'm sorry, what? You mismanaged expectations, he said, voice rising just enough to carry through the thin office walls. You let them dictate timelines. You let them get spooked. You weren't assertive enough. I felt the heat rise in my chest. I stayed seated. Helix Core pulled out after you sent them a proposal you rewrote behind my back, I said. Vantilux left after you CC'd them on an internal thread. And Skyfleet? You bypassed legal and sent them a non-compliant roadmap. His mouth twitched. I don't remember it that way. No, I said quietly. You just don't want to remember it that way. He waved his hand dismissively, already done with the conversation. I don't have time for this, he said, standing. Let's just get through the negotiations. After that, we'll talk about your future here. Your future here. I knew what that meant. This wasn't about clients. It was about the end, the timing, the optics. He wanted me gone. I stood up, nodded once, and walked out without a word. I went straight to the conference room. Empty for now, but soon it would be full of fresh suits, eager faces, and the buzz of potential deals. My laptop was already set up at the head of the table. The presentation I'd built over the past 72 hours was ready to go. Clean slides, embedded media, performance data, market comparisons, everything they'd need to say yes. But I wasn't just thinking about the pitch anymore. I was thinking about the truth. So I sat down, opened a command prompt, typed a few quiet keystrokes, a string of characters I'd embedded into the back end of the presentation software 2 years ago during a late-night security audit. Just in case. Always just in case. The code didn't delete anything. It didn't sabotage. It did something better. It unlocked a hidden presentation, a separate version of the client pitch, identical on the surface, but with one difference. At the end of the slide deck, it revealed the contribution matrix, side by side. Who made the decisions? Who sent the proposals? Who made the changes? Who actually lost those clients? It was clean, time-stamped, verifiable. There was no room for interpretation, only facts. And if during the negotiations, Alan decided to twist the story one last time, if he tried to pin his failures on me in front of the new clients, I only had to type 5 letters to switch to the alternate deck. 5 letters. Then I closed the lid, smoothed my blazer, and waited. Because this wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about reclaiming my name before they tried to erase it for good. The boardroom was pristine. Polished glass table, bottled water arranged in perfect triangles, one too many pens for people who rarely wrote things by hand. My laptop sat at the head of the table, the presentation queued and ready. White screen, black serif title. Strategic Vision for Sustainable Growth, 2025. The clients arrived in waves. First VerityLink's COO, then Solentra's tech lead, and finally Kyber Data's entire executive trio. All handshakes, small talk, practiced grins. I greeted them warmly, offered insights, teased the highlights of the deck we were about to walk through. And for a brief moment, I forgot how close the blade was to my throat. Alan strode in last, all charm and cologne, sleeves rolled like he'd just emerged from doing something valuable. He barely glanced at me as he took the chair beside mine, directly across from Kyber's CEO. We're thrilled to have you all here, he began, voice oiled with performative sincerity. Today's presentation will give you a glimpse into how we're reshaping the future of cross-industry data infrastructure. He didn't introduce me. Not even a, "This is Mia, who built the deck." Nothing. I let him speak. I let him smile. I let him steer the conversation through the first 10 slides. Metrics, market position, service history. He stumbled twice, hesitated over a few technical terms. That wasn't my concern, because I knew what slide 15 held. And we never got to it. 15 minutes in, just as I was leaning forward to speak about client alignment strategy, a man from HR appeared at the door. He didn't knock. He walked in, pale and unsure, holding a single envelope. "Mia Taylor," he said awkwardly. "Could you step out for a moment?" I froze. Everyone looked at me. "No," Alan said suddenly, too quickly. "We're in the middle of something." The HR rep hesitated. "It's urgent." I stood slowly. "If it's urgent, we can do it here." VerityLink's COO raised an eyebrow. Alan shot up from his seat. "Mia?" "No," I said, my voice steady, louder than it had been in days. "Let's be transparent. That's what our company claims to value, right?" HR looked mortified. "This is a formality. We can handle this." "Let me guess," I said, reaching for the envelope. "Termination of employment, effective immediately?" The room went dead silent. I turned to the clients, every last one of them watching in confusion, some in disbelief. "I'm being fired," I said calmly, "in front of you." Kyber's CEO looked from me to Alan. "This woman just walked us through your foundational strategy pitch." Alan cleared his throat. "This was a transition we'd been planning, irrelevant to today's business." Solentra's lead frowned. "You're terminating your strategy lead during negotiations?" "She's not part of our long-term vision," Alan said, forcing a smile. I smiled too, but it was different. I walked to the laptop, typed 5 letters. The deck flickered, and the new one loaded. At first, they thought it was a glitch, just a few bar graphs and names. But then the final section rolled in. A full timeline of every major client loss, annotated. Helix Core, Vonta Lux, Skyfleet, each one paired with a header. Action taken by Executive VP A. Brewster. Meeting times, proposal versions, dates, senders. All traceable, all factual, all his. The clients stared. Alan turned white. "What is this?" VerityLink's rep whispered. "The truth," I said. Then I stepped back from the screen and picked up my bag. "I spent 15 years building this place from the inside out. I made mistakes, sure, but not those, and I will not be a scapegoat for a man who confuses ego with leadership." I turned, walking toward the door. "You're free to believe whoever you want. Just make sure you're believing someone who knows what they're talking about." As the door closed behind me, I heard it. One of the clients. A single, quiet sentence. "I think we need to revisit this deal." The walk to the elevator felt longer than it ever had before. Every step echoed behind me like punctuation, sharp, final. My hands didn't tremble. My breath didn't hitch. I'd expected the fallout. I just hadn't expected how quiet it would be. When the elevator doors opened, I turned for one last glance down the hallway. Through the glass walls of the boardroom, I could see it unraveling. Kyber Data's CEO had pushed his chair back and was standing. Solentra's lead was shaking her head. VerityLink's rep was on the phone, pacing. Alan stood at the head of the table, red-faced and flailing, pointing at the screen, then at my empty chair, trying to spin something, anything. But there was nothing to spin. The truth was glowing on the screen like a spotlight. I didn't need to be there to see the moment it all fell apart. I was back in my apartment less than an hour later, kicked off my shoes, poured a glass of water, and sat in the middle of my living room in absolute stillness. The silence felt earned. My phone buzzed once, unknown number. I didn't answer. Then again, and again. By the 4th time, I picked up. No greeting. "Mia!" It was Alan's voice. Acid and gravel. "Alan," I said calmly. "What the hell do you think you just did?" I didn't answer. "They terminated," he hissed. "All 3. Called it a breach of trust. Said they don't work with companies who fire the brains mid-negotiation. Do you have any idea what you've done?" "I showed them the facts," I said. "They made their decision. You destroyed everything. You think this is some moral victory? You're finished in this industry. I'll make sure of it." There it was. The threat. He couldn't control the clients. He couldn't fix his image. So now he was going after me. "I know every firm in this city," he snapped. "Every recruiter, every board. You'll never work again." I smiled. That's what men like you say when the mask slips, I replied. When they realize people finally saw the version of you you've been hiding behind title and meetings and forced charisma. You're done, Mia. No, I said softly. You are. I ended the call and dropped the phone onto the couch beside me. Let him rage. Let him spiral. Let him burn whatever bridges he could reach with his short-sighted, scorched earth ego. Because I had something he didn't. Proof. And reputation doesn't just come from titles. It comes from consistency. From years of being the one who stayed late, who solved the unsolvable, who led with integrity when no one was watching. People remembered that. Clients remembered that. Already, emails were starting to come in. Quiet ones. From names I hadn't seen in years. Former clients, ex-colleagues. A simple message from a senior executive at a startup I once helped launch. If you're free, we'd love to talk. I wasn't broken. I wasn't finished. Alan thought he'd buried me under shame. But all he did was plant the seed of my next chapter. And this time, I wouldn't be building someone else's empire. I'd be building my own. By Wednesday morning, the story had spread. Not through the media, yet, but in the quiet, electrified way scandals always do in our industry. Emails without subjects, Slack threads that went mysteriously silent, LinkedIn connections popping up with new job titles overnight. And then came the texts, first from Nina, the former compliance lead, then Mark from DevOps, then Jasmine, my right hand in strategy and one of the sharpest minds I've ever worked with. Mia, he fired me. They said I was culturally misaligned after 8 years. Guess who else just got restructured? The pattern became horrifyingly clear. Alan wasn't just cutting me loose. He was cleaning house. Anyone who had supported me, anyone who had spoken up, anyone who dared to side with facts over fiction. They were all gone. And he wasn't doing it with HR memos or exit interviews. He was doing it quietly, sweeping out anyone with a spine and replacing them with blank slate yes men. People who would never challenge him. People who didn't know what the company used to be. I sat at my dining table, surrounded by coffee cups, sticky notes, and my laptop, reading message after message from people I'd worked beside for years. They weren't just fired. They were discarded. But something else was happening too. These weren't people ready to crawl away and lick their wounds. They were planning, connecting, organizing. Mark was already in talks with VerityLink, offering freelance back-end system support. Nina had messaged Solentra's legal director with an annotated compliance framework we'd once co-designed, a quiet reminder of what a functioning partnership used to look like. Jasmine had been asked to consult informally with Kyber Data on restructuring their strategic operations. We weren't begging for scraps. We were being sought. Because the truth was this: those companies didn't walk away from us just because Alan fired me. They walked away because they saw the pattern. They saw a company gutting its best minds to protect the ego of one man. And now, they wanted the people who actually did the work, the ones who built the wins Alan took credit for, so we gave them options. We didn't form a new company, not yet. But we coordinated, shared contacts, passed leads, back-channeled our way into project discussions. The irony was almost poetic. The very clients Alan once claimed I had driven away were now choosing us, freelancers, consultants, advisors, over the firm we left behind. I wasn't alone anymore, and I wasn't waiting for justice. I was building it. One call, one contract, one quiet reclaiming at a time. That night, Jasmine sent me a photo. It was a whiteboard in her apartment, covered in names, logos, deadlines. At the top, she'd written in red marker, "We were the talent. We still are." I stared at it for a long time, a slow smile creeping across my face. Alan had underestimated all of us. And now? Now he was going to watch everything he thought he controlled walk out the door. Not in protest, but in purpose. It came in the form of an email. Subject: VerityLink, let's talk next steps. I opened it with the usual guarded hope, expecting some vague nod at collaboration, maybe a one-off consulting gig. But it wasn't that. It was bigger. It was Jasmine who had led the call with their strategy lead the day before. I had helped prepare some supporting documents. Nothing formal, just case studies, risk assessments, a few slides from the presentation we never got to finish. But apparently, it was more than enough. The message was direct. We've decided to move forward with you and your team. We're finalizing the paperwork now. It'll be structured as a development partnership, not just freelance support. And yes, the contract will include attribution. Attribution. That word hit me like sunlight after a long winter. We'd like you to be listed as the lead architect of the framework you presented, they wrote. You deserve the credit. And we're also working on a case study for our stakeholders. There's a section in the draft titled, What Not to Do in Executive Leadership, Lessons from Halberd and Price. We thought you might enjoy that. I laughed. Out loud, not a bitter laugh, not a sarcastic one, a real one. I called Jasmine immediately. She picked up on the first ring, breathless and giddy. You saw it? She asked. I did, I said. Please tell me you came up with that section title. Oh, I did. And wait until you read the pull quote from Alan's Helix Core proposal. You remember that gem? Client hesitation is best addressed by removing technical constraints. We're putting that one in bold, under the heading, How to Lose $12 Million in 48 Hours. It wasn't just a jab, it was a receipt. A carefully composed, ethically sound, professionally devastating receipt. We got to work that afternoon. Not just on the new framework VerityLink was adopting, but on the presentation they'd asked us to deliver at the upcoming industry roundtable. It would be streamed live to over 2,000 stakeholders, including many of the same executives who once ignored us in favor of Alan's bloated promises. And this time, the credits wouldn't be stolen. My name, Mia Taylor, would be at the top of the deck. Jasmine would co-present. Mark would demo the architecture model. Nina would outline compliance flow. Every slide was polished, every metric footnoted. And the final one? Slide 28. Acknowledgements and lessons learned. Beneath it, in clean, subtle italics. Our thanks to former leadership for demonstrating exactly what not to do with high-value client relationships. We laughed when we inserted it. We knew Alan would see it, knew someone from Halberd and Price would flag it, screenshot it, forward it in a flurry of Slack messages filled with panicked punctuation. And that was the point. Not to burn the bridge, but to hang a banner on it before walking confidently to the other side. This wasn't vengeance for the sake of ego. It was vindication for every late night, every erased credit, every sentence rewritten in someone else's voice. We had our voices back, and soon the whole industry would hear them. It didn't happen overnight, but it was fast enough to feel like a freefall. By the end of the month, the headlines started to surface. Halberd and Price faces strategic exodus after failed client negotiations. Multiple partnerships fall through amidst leadership shakeups. Industry leaders question executive stability at H&P. Inside sources whispered what I already knew. Kyber Data and Solentra never returned Alan's calls. VerityLink, of course, was already on our side, and other prospects were pulling back, citing alignment concerns. Translation: no one wanted to gamble on a company that had fired its lead strategist in front of clients, and then couldn't explain what went wrong. The dominoes didn't just fall. They collapsed in a heap of missed deadlines, botched communications, and Alan's increasingly desperate attempts to save face. I heard through the grapevine that he tried to rebrand the negotiation debacle as an aggressive evolution strategy, tried to spin my departure as creative differences. But you can only spin the story so long when the data says otherwise. And the data? It was everywhere. VerityLink's new roadmap was already published, and every line bore the unmistakable fingerprints of the team he discarded. Jasmine's compliance framework, Mark's back-end systems. My strategic model for progressive infrastructure growth, credited, visible, and already generating buzz. Meanwhile, Halberd and Price couldn't even lock in a second-tier fintech startup without tripping over their own process. I should have felt triumphant. But what I felt was calm. like standing still after years of swimming upstream. Not because I had won, not because Alan had finally started to feel the squeeze of his own arrogance, but because I never had to scream to be heard. I just had to show the truth, and then let it speak for itself. I remember standing backstage before the Verity Link presentation, adjusting the lapel mic on my blazer, watching the intro video roll on the big screen. My name appeared in the lower third of the frame with the words Strategic Lead, Independent Consultant. But I wasn't just a consultant anymore. I was a founder now. Jasmine and I had filed the papers the week prior. Our own boutique strategy firm. Focused, selective, human. And every contract we took on, we chose with care. Not because we needed to prove ourselves, because we already had. After the presentation, I stepped outside for a breath of air. The sun was starting to set, gold light bouncing off the buildings, painting long shadows over the concrete. My phone buzzed. Another message, this one from a name I hadn't seen since the Helix Core fallout. Mia, you were right. I'm sorry I didn't say it sooner. If you ever need a recommendation, you have mine. Alan's being investigated internally. It's falling apart without you. I stared at the screen. No response needed. The truth didn't need defending anymore. It had already done its job. In the months that followed, the industry changed. Not because of a press release, not because someone new stepped into Alan's old glass office and promised reform. It changed because people paid attention. Because the whisper networks between departments and companies started turning into real conversations about leadership, respect, and the invisible work behind every major win. As for me, I didn't vanish. I didn't break. I rebuilt. Our new firm, Clarity Strategies, launched quietly, without fanfare. We didn't want headlines. We wanted impact. Jasmine and I curated our first client list carefully. Companies with vision, yes, but also with humility, with people who didn't flinch when we said things like sustainable practices or credit where it's due. In 6 months, we grew from 2 to 8. Mark came on full-time. Nina took over legal frameworks. Even a few younger professionals from Halbert and Price reached out privately, asking to be part of something more honest. We gave them what Alan never did: mentorship, transparency, and a seat at the table. Meanwhile, Halbert and Price faded. Their stock slipped. Their top clients either terminated or quietly disengaged. And when the board finally ousted Alan, it was too late. The damage wasn't just financial, it was cultural. They tried a rebrand, slapped a new logo on the door, hired a crisis PR firm. But you can't polish a foundation that's already rotting. I never celebrated his fall. There was no victory dance, no petty glee. Because in the end, the real win wasn't his downfall. It was my freedom. Freedom from rooms where I had to defend my worth. Freedom from systems that fed on silence and survival. Freedom to choose who I worked with, how I worked, and what kind of legacy I wanted to leave behind. Looking back, the lesson is simple. Always document the truth. Stand by it. Let the facts speak, even when people won't. Because eventually, they will. And when they do, be ready to move forward. Not out of bitterness, but out of purpose. I still walk past the old Halberd building sometimes. The logo is gone. The lights in the corner offices are off. A new startup's moved in, painting the walls bright green, covering the lobby with abstract murals and promises of disruption. I wish them well, but I don't look back. Because the truth? I didn't just survive the fire. I became the architect of what came next. And that's a story I will always be proud to own.